One of the experiences I trust every homebrewer shares is the feeling of awe that comes from witnessing the conversion of wort into beer through the fermentation process. Even after 15 years, I still get giddy when I see the first signs of airlock activity, a nice fluffy kreuzen developing on top of my beer. The worst is when this takes too long. You all know the anxiety that comes from checking on a batch a day after pitching and seeing no action. This is why we love Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch right pouch, which assures quick starts, healthy fermentation, and predictably great results. I strongly urge all of our listeners to check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Brewlosophy podcast while you're at it. All right, on to the show. Hey everybody, you're listening to the Brewlosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and for this episode, we are going to do something just a bit different than usual. Give all of our listeners a little gift for all of the support over the years. Now, the main source of support for this podcast, as well as the Brewlosophy.com website, comes from Patreon, a platform where folks who appreciate what we do make a relatively small monthly pledge, and in addition to allowing us to keep doing all of this stuff, they get a neat reward. Now, we offer various tiers ranging from $1 all the way up to $25 per month, though the $5 tier is easily one of our most popular, as the reward is a unique monthly discount to Yakima Valley hops that is almost always worth more than the $5 pledge. In fact, for the month of November 2020, patrons get $5 off each 1 pound bag of Triumph hops, and even cooler is the fact the proceeds go to help women affected by breast cancer. Since patrons receive all of the rewards of lower tiers, those pledging at the $5 level also receive the benefits of our $3 tier, which is a monthly invitation to a live Q&A with somebody in the brewing world. Our list of guests over the last couple of years is pretty crazy. John Palmer, Vinny Cilurzo, Scott Janish, Gordon Strong, Jay Goodwin, Stan Hieronymus, Tom Shellhammer, Michael Tonsmeyer, and so many more. And in these sessions, the guest streams a video in our private Facebook group, and patrons leave questions in the comments. Back in February, one of my brewing idols, Mitch Steele from New Realm Brewing out of Atlanta, Georgia, and previously of Stone Brewing, was the guest and dropped some amazing knowledge on our patrons. It was such an excellent session, in fact, that we decided to share it with the rest of the world. We really hope you all enjoy it and would love for you to be a part of future sessions as well. Please take a minute to head over to patreon.com/brewlosophy to check out all of the rewards you can get for supporting our efforts, and know that we could not do this if it weren't for our patrons. All right, another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support. When shopping online, your shopping experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral, and with the holidays coming up, that is a very helpful thing for us. Also, if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and a review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we really would appreciate it. The love that we've been getting in these reviews is both encouraging and humbling, so thanks to all of those who have taken the time to tell us what you think. Feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who specialize in triclover-compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique items for home and craft brewers, including high-quality stainless fittings at great prices with super fast shipping. Learn more at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. A listener who goes by The Traveling Homebrewer had some feedback on our recent experience episode on building draft systems. He says, you were talking about a primary regulator that has 2 outlets, and the second was kind of pointless. Not sure if you were referring to the one with a Y or a dual regulator. I've switched to the dual regulator for the past 6 years on many of my systems that I've built, and I use one side to run my manifold and feed my 6 kegs, and the other I use to force carbonate. Yes, I definitely could have been more clear on this one. I was actually referring to the dual gauge regulator that I believe the Traveling Homebrewer is talking about, the one that allows you to independently control the PSI to 2 separate kegs. The only reason I personally think it's sort of pointless is that I use secondary regulators, all of which are also independently controlled. So for example, I'm currently planning a new kegerator that will have 4 taps. So I'll be using an inexpensive primary regulator, just a single product regulator that'll stay set to 50 PSI at all times. And then I'm going to run a line from that to a 4 product secondary regulator where I control the pressure to each keg independently. I could see how a simple Y off the primary regulator might be helpful on larger builds with more taps. So, if you're serving just a couple of kegs or you don't want to drop the cash on a secondary regulator, they are definitely more expensive than standard manifolds. A dual product primary regulator might be the ticket for you. Who knows? You just kind of got to build what's going to work for you. If I was only serving 2 beers, I would definitely see the value in having a primary regulator with 2 independently controlled pressure regulators on it. But I'm not doing that. And so if I'm going to use a secondary anyways, I really only need one source of a higher pressure gas. And so that was my point. I was not trying to talk anybody out of doing what they want to do or what works best for their systems, I promise. I was just sharing my personal thoughts on it. All right. We also got some feedback from listener David Chebby, who shares an experience with someone who asked a question in our last Brew and A episode. David commented, I was listening to episode 160, and when Cole's question was read, I immediately recalled that I had the same issue a couple times recently. Now, this was the issue where Cole's pre-boil gravity was basically the same as his post-boil OG. David goes on to say, I do full volume brew-in-a-bag batches and use a hydrometer for gravity readings. I was also shocked how high my pre-boil gravity was, but after the boil, it was still the same. I mostly do 20 to 30 minute boils, but still evaporate a few liters of liquid because of the rolling boil. I also chill the wort to about the same temperature as the hydrometer is calibrated for. What really helped me to get a more reasonable reading was to get a whisk and to swirl the wort a bit, especially from the bottom to the top of the kettle while heating up for the boil. I found that if you just pull samples from the valve, the liquid with a higher amount of sugars will settle down because it is heavier. So when I do this technique, I have the sugars in the wort more equally spread and can pull a sample. Since I started using this trick, the pre-boil gravity is more along the lines of what Beersmith predicts. You make an excellent point, David, and I'm surprised that we didn't touch on this in that Brew and A episode, particularly for some brewing systems and approaches. If you don't homogenize the wort, there can be some stratification of that wort in the kettle. I actually had sort of the opposite experience a few years ago where I was taking refractometer samples off the top of the wort, and it was showing a few points lower than expected. This was really only when I did 10-gallon batch sizes, which is about, 38 liters or so. But either way, stirring did seem to do the trick. So Cole, if you're listening and you aren't already homogenizing your wort by stirring it prior to taking your pre-boil gravity readings, give it a shot and see how it works. All right. Thanks so much for the feedback, David. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. As I'm sure many of you are well aware at this point, Jersey is a fighter pilot. He flies the mighty F-15 out of the Air National Guard base right here in Fresno, California. And obviously there's a relatively large military contingent in this town, many of whom happen to like beer. Surprise, surprise. Well, Tactical Ops Brewing Company was founded by one of these guys, Justin Campaign, and has really owned the whole military theme. In fact, they've got photos of Jersey and Justin's brother, we call him Cougar, flying F-15s hanging on the walls of their tap room. Well, back in 2017, they had a booth at the Clovis Craft Beer Crawl, and one of the beers they were serving was a chocolate coconut oatmeal stout.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
I like it. It's kind of very... like an oak taste to it. It's good. I'm not getting that much of a coconut, really.
Tim has no coconut. It's very delicious, very good. I would say my favorite beer on this whole walk.
Tool of the state. It's a delicious beer, man. I taste it and I'm like, it's delicious. So we have Megan here, who's just a random, very nice lady from the crowd who'd like to taste the beer and give her own impression.
It's cool. I like it, but I like the oatmeal. I love it. This is pretty legit.
If you couldn't tell, we were drinking that beer at the tail end of our time at the Craft Beer Crawl. The guys seemed less than interested in continuing to review it and more interested on being social. Hence, they weren't a big part of this review. I'm not really sure where Megan came from, but Megan, if you're listening, which I doubt, thanks for your review. I'm glad you liked the beer. My notes say I got a good dose of coconut from the beer, but I'd be lying if I said I remember it at all. Cheers to Uber for getting us all home safely. All right. If you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage you feel like sending in reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, marshall@brulosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. When we come back from this break, Mitch Steele responds to patrons' questions. Brulosophy is headquartered out of Fresno, California, a quaint city in the shadow of the Sierra Nevada mountain range, which has been ravaged by wildfires this season. Closest to home is the Creek Fire. In fact, I was camping with my family when it started, and we all had to be evacuated. This fire has grown to become the largest wildfire in California's history, and most of the structures destroyed were primary residences. Rebuild Our Sierra is a grassroots, long-term fundraising effort created by a few dedicated mountain people with the goal of helping those who have been affected by this wildfire. They know that when the smoke clears and the relief organizations move on, the mountains and foothills will need help to rebuild, revive, and renew. Find out more by following Rebuild Our Sierra on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to visit rebuildoursierra.org. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brulosophy sent you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all-grain beer in a single, compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free Recipe Creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD, at AtlanticBrewSupply.com.
My name is Mitch Steele. I'm the brewmaster at a brewery called New Realm Brewing Company. We have breweries in Atlanta and Virginia Beach. I've been in the brewing industry a long time, since 1988, and I got started in a pub brewery in California called San Andreas Brewing Company in a town called Hollister, which was kind of in between Monterey and San Jose. And that was a 15 barrel system, 14 barrel system, I believe, 2 vessel, kind of a classic brew pub from the 80s. And, we got going, what they were calling in the Bay Area at the time, this kind of the second wave of brew pubs, same time that some pretty classic brew pubs got started in the area, like Gordon Biersch and Tide House and Winchester Brewing Company and a few others that I'm having a little bit of trouble remembering. But we had a lot of fun. It was a pretty close-knit group, the brewers. And I still keep in touch with a lot of them today. So that's the Bay Area brewing scene's pretty special to me. It was a fun job. I was working there part-time. We were only brewing once a week or maybe twice a week. And so I was able to keep my day job at a winery. I was working for a wine company called Almond and Vineyards, and they own 2 wineries in the Hollister area. And I worked at both of them over the years that I was there, but I was able to moonlight and work at San Andreas when we needed to brew. And, and I spent a lot of time there for about 4 years. 1992, I decided to make brewing a full-time thing. And I ended up getting a job with Anheuser-Busch in Fort Collins, Colorado. They had a brewery there that was pretty new. And I went on board there as a shift supervisor. So I was running shifts for 3 years, basically doing the shift-to-shift planning and managing the people brewing the beer. It was a union brewery. And so as a supervisor, I couldn't get hands-on there at all. But I spent 3 years there. It was a great 3 years. Fort Collins is a wonderful town. That was right when New Belgium was starting up, and Odell's and some of those great breweries that are still there in Fort Collins. So it was a really nice experience for me to be able to spend time in such a pretty place and such a cool spot. After 3 years, I was promoted and I got transferred to St. Louis. And I got put in charge of new products for Anheuser-Busch and did that for, just about 4 years or so. It was an exciting time. It was when Anheuser-Busch was just getting into brewing ales, and they had this kind of pseudo group called the Specialty Brewing Group that I was part of. That was mostly a marketing function, but there were a couple of brewers and brewing managers that were part of that team. And I was one of them, and we came up with a lot of really neat beers. Not all of them got released, obviously, but we were able to be creative and really develop a nice catalog of beer styles, which was cool. Great experience. I learned a heck of a lot. I learned most of what I've learned about beer styles. I learned researching that during that period in Anheuser-Busch. At San Andreas before that, and when I was home brewing, it was typically, I was brewing pale ales and porters and stouts and IPAs, and that was about it. And, when I got to Anheuser-Busch, we spread our wings a little bit, and we're researching classic lagers and Belgian beers and all sorts of neat stuff. And like I said, not a lot of that saw the light of day, but it was still a great experience, and I learned a lot. 1999, I went back into the brewery management side of things, the operations side, and worked in the St. Louis brewery, which is a huge brewery. It's the biggest one Anheuser-Busch has. We were mashing in 60 brews a day if everything went perfectly, maybe even 72. And I did that for a year and a half, 2 years. It was crazy busy. It was a crazy time. It was really pretty stressful, actually, to be managing an operation of that scope. But it was a great experience. And then I got transferred to Merrimack, New Hampshire, and I worked in Anheuser-Busch's Merrimack Brewery, which is their smallest brewery. And I worked there for 6 years, and I ran the brew house and the fermenting cellar. So another great experience. And, I like to tell people that my time at Anheuser-Busch, I had a 5-year plan going in. I was going to try and soak up as much knowledge as I could in 5 years. And then I was going to look to get back out into craft. And I ended up staying there 14 years because I had some really great experiences and was living in some pretty cool places. So, that plan didn't quite work out the way I had anticipated, but I've got no regrets about my time with Anheuser-Busch. Learned a lot. I like to tell people that's how I learned how to run a brewery. Really good experiences there and good practices that I was able to take with me to my more recent jobs. 2006, I went to Stone Brewing Company and brewed at Stone for 10 years, ran the brewing operation. We started off, when I got there, we brewed just under 40,000 barrels of beer in 2006. And in 2016, we did, almost 400,000 barrels of beer. So basically a tenfold increase in volume in my 10 years at Stone. We were in a constant state of growth, a constant state of expansion. So I got a lot of experience managing projects and working capital projects and, fermenter, new cellar build outs and fermenter installs. And, at one point we built another building next door to us that we were able to move our entire packaging operation to, and our bright tank operation, and dug a tunnel between the two buildings so that we can transfer the beer from one to the other. It was pretty crazy times. I got to do a lot of neat stuff at Stone. It was a great 10 years. I loved working there. I loved the people at Stone. I still keep in touch. They're great friends, and they're really doing some neat things. And I built a really good team there, a team of brewers and managers and engineering, and a lot of those folks are still there. And they are still making great beer. So it's I was just there a couple weeks ago. It was a great visit, and I got to see a lot of folks. So my time at Stone was pretty exciting. During that time, I got the opportunity to write the book on India Pale Ale for the Brewers Association, which was a crazy project, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. I spent a lot of weekends hunkered down at a computer trying to get this thing done, but it was pretty cool. So that book was published in 2012. Steve Wagner, who was the co-founder of Stone and the president of Stone and my boss at the time, he and I took a lot of trips to England. That's kind of where my passion for historical beer styles and old English brewing tradition was really kind of spurred on. And I'm still really excited about learning about that kind of stuff today. Even though there's not much of a market for those kind of beers right now. Anyway, 10 years at Stone, great 10 years. And then in 2016, I left to join Kerry Falcone and Bob Powers in starting New Realm Brewing Company. At the time, we didn't know where we were going to go, but Kerry, who's from Atlanta, found a great building in Atlanta, and we flew out and looked at it, and we're like, okay, this could really be a cool spot. So we are located just a couple of miles east of downtown Atlanta, and we're in a really great spot. It's an intersection of a couple of neighborhoods, the Old Fourth Ward and Inman Park and Ponce Highlands, and we are right in the heart of a huge restaurant and bar district east of Atlanta, and it's a lot of foot traffic. We're on a path called the Beltline, which is really cool. It's a old railroad line that the city is converting into walking and biking paths, and we are on the busiest stretch of it. It's not complete yet, but when it's completed, it should encircle the entire city of Atlanta. So anyway, that's the New Realm location in Atlanta. We've got a 20-barrel brew house there, or 25-hectoliter brew house built by Krohn's Steinecker. We've got 40-barrel fermenters and a couple of 60-barrel fermenters, so we're usually double batching into fermenters. And we've got a great brewing team there. Tyler, our head brewer, used to work at Sierra Nevada. And Christine and Steve both have industry experience at some other great breweries. And, so we've got a team of about 4 people there now. Sterling is the 4th. And we're having fun there. And one of the things that changed after we opened in January of 2018 is we were able to purchase on auction the Green Flash Brewery in Virginia Beach, which had been shut down and repossessed by the bank, and everybody had been laid off. And the bank put it up for auction, and we were able to jump in there and get it. And it's a huge facility. It's almost 50,000 square feet of space, really high ceilings. We've got a 50-barrel brew house in there that was built by Mueller. 100 barrels, 50 barrel, and 250 barrel fermenters. So it's designed to crank out a lot of beer, and we're not close to using it at capacity yet. But to be able to go in there and buy a brewery that had been running for just 2 years, it's like buying a car with 10,000 miles on it. It's basically brand new. So it's interesting. It looks like we got some questions here, so I'm going to go ahead and start answering questions. And when we have any dead time, I'll finish the story. The first question is from Jim. Avoiding hot cold side oxidation is a hot topic, particularly with hoppy styles. Yeah, I think it has always been a priority. I think back in the 80s, there weren't a lot of brewers that really understood it on the craft side. I know I learned most of what I learned about oxidation and dissolved oxygen levels in finished beer Anheuser-Busch, but it's very much a concern. If you're a brewery and you are packaging your beer, especially in cans or bottles, if you don't have a dissolved oxygen meter, you're missing a great opportunity to enhance the quality of your beer. It's interesting. There's been a lot of studies that show that that the hop character in beer fades very quickly, especially under oxidative conditions. And we found that to be true. Most breweries nowadays, now that the education piece is out there and people have learned and experienced this for a while now, most people realize that you got to keep the dissolved oxygen low once the beer is done fermenting. Otherwise, you're going to get staling flavors and you're going to lose your hop character. And it's a very valid concern. A lot of these, a lot of brewers now, when they produce bright beer, they try to get the dissolved oxygen levels below 10 parts per billion, which is a good place to be. And then you try to minimize the pickup during packaging. You're always going to see some oxygen pickup during packaging. And your job as a brewer is to keep it as low as possible. And there are some some beers that survive oxidation better than others. As far as the hop character goes, one thing we found at Stone is that the hop character in our beers, under good oxidation conditions, but at room temperature, the hops faded pretty quick. And the beer didn't start tasting oxidized, which is that kind of grainy, crackery, papery kind of flavor, until it was pretty old. But the hop character really faded quickly. And it really depended on what kind of hops we were using. One thing we found was that Citra was one that just did not hang around. And some of the Australian and New Zealand hops stick around forever. So, when we were brewing our anniversary beers at Stone and we were using, we brewed an Australian IPA and we brewed an English double IPA and we brewed a German double IPA. And I can tell you that all three of those beers, the hop character lasted better than using American hops. And I think that would be an interesting thing for people to study. I don't understand it myself. So anyway, yeah, dissolved oxygen on the cold side is incredibly important. As a home brewer, it's a little more tough to control. But if you keep a CO2 blanket on your beer and CO2 purge your bottles before you bottle, or your keg before you keg, you're going to be in much better shape. Also, another thing that really helps is bottle conditioning or keg conditioning with live yeast, because the yeast will consume the oxygen before it can interact with the beer, and that's a good protective device. Next question is, were there any beers at AB you were really bummed they didn't get released? Yeah, absolutely. A couple of the ones that really stand out, we did an India Pale Ale back in 1996 and really did very well in taste panels. It was, it was about 7% alcohol. It was 60 to 65 IBUs, I believe. And it was dry hopped with some combination of C hops. I think we were using Centennial and Cascade at the time. But we brewed this beer and it was really great. We ended up taking it out to the Great American Beer Festival and serving it as a special beer. And that was the first time I ever experienced having lines at our booth, which was really cool. And we got back all fired up and about the beer, and our marketing department said, no, we don't want that. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but kind of was a pretty down point for me. We had a Scotch ale that we brewed that August Bush III actually really liked and was taking kegs home to serve on his home bar. We thought that one was a winner. We had planned to brew that for a winter beer release in the later 90s. And after we had brewed a big batch of it in Merrimack, New Hampshire, the marketing team changed their minds and decided they wanted a spiced ale instead, which is a long and drawn out story. But that's those are two beers that really stand out as beers that I wish we had been able to release at Anheuser-Busch. And, there was a thinking at Anheuser-Busch that they didn't really, even though they were in the category of, what they called specialty beers or microbrews, whatever they were called back then, they weren't called craft beer. Microbrews was the most common term. But we never called our beers microbrews because they weren't. They were, we called them specialty beers. In any event, the folks at Anheuser-Busch that drove decisions on things like this did not want that category to become a big deal. And of course, it has become a big deal. They weren't able to stop it. But one of the reasons they didn't want us to be particularly innovative with our beers was because they didn't want to grow the category, which was a pretty heavy lesson I had to learn while I was there. And it really kind of fueled my exit. Let's see. Next question. Ryan asks, nitro CO2 carbonation tips would be appreciated. Not sure what to say here. I can tell you that nitrogenating beer is, you want to keep your CO2 levels in very low, like 1.2 to 1.5 volumes in a regular beer. Just to set the stage here is 2.5 to 3 volumes of CO2. So it's pretty low carbonation. And then what we do, and this is what a lot of brewers do, is you put the beer in a bright tank that's been gas pure with nitrogen. It's got to be an ASME rated tank. It means it can handle 2 bar or 32 psi of pressure. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble doing this. But you put the beer into a gas tank, and then you can either blow nitrogen in through the bottom or use a carb stone, which is what we do, and shut the blow-off valve and just push nitrogen in until you hit about anywhere from 25 to 30 psi in the tank, and hold it for 24 hours. Then what we do is we blow the tank down, meaning we just open the down tube valve and let the excess pressure release slowly. We don't do it fast. You do it very slowly. And then we repeat the process 2 or 3 times, and that usually gets us a pretty well nitrogenated beer. We had an interesting experience recently in Atlanta where we tried to nitrogenate cans of beer, and that was fun. We were dipping liquid nitrogen dropping liquid nitrogen into the cans, so right after they were full, and it was pretty cool. And it worked reasonably well. There were some things we struggled with there. Not sure what else I can say about that. If there's anything specific you want to ask about carbonation that I didn't touch on, just ask again, and I'll try and get to it. What's my opinion on biotransformation? It is absolutely real. And it depends on what yeast you're using and what hop you're using in a mid-fermentation dry hop. It's, when we did our very first hazy IPA, which was in a couple of months after we opened, we started researching it, and then we felt comfortable enough to give it a shot. We used London Ale 3, and we've tried different yeasts since then, and I'll talk about those in a second. But we used London Ale 3, and we used Azacca and Eldorado hops. And the day after we dry hop that beer, and we taste our fermenters every day at New Realm, the day after we dry hop that beer, the hop character changed radically. I mean, it was just turning into orange juice, and it's a very real phenomenon, but it is very yeast strain and hop strain dependent. I have heard we've tried doing this with Centennial, and it didn't work. I know a lot of hazy IPA brewers are using Galaxy and Citra for the biotransformation step. I can tell you that Idaho 7 works great. It's a great hop to use as a mid-fermentation addition. Eldorado is a great hop as well. So I'm not really well versed enough in the science to know what compounds are really contributing to that. I've heard geraniol is the primary compound that's being converted into limonene. And so the hop character goes from floral to citrusy during this process. You need to have yeast in the beer. The yeast strain we have found is important. Most of our beers are fermented with cal ale yeast, And Cal Ale yeast doesn't do it for us. As far as if we're trying to get biotransformation, it's a great yeast for everything else, but it just doesn't really do it. So we've been using London Ale 3 pretty much on a regular basis. We've used the Conan yeast, which doesn't flocculate out real well, which is why we don't use it a lot. And then an interesting thing that we've been doing is we've been using the Norwegian farmhouse yeast, the Kvike yeast, to produce hazy, hoppy beers, and that's been really fun as well. Okay, the next question. Knowing that hop character drops out so quickly, what are your thoughts on the hazy trend that tends to not be hoppy per se? I'm not sure what that question means. I'm happy to try and answer it. I think one of the things that I see with hazy IPAs and a lot of the smaller breweries that are doing them is they get them in and out very quickly. So they brew the beer. They have a big, a line forms during the packaging process. People buy the cases off the packaging line and take them home and drink them right away. And so there's not a lot of time sitting on a shelf somewhere. There's not a lot of time sitting warm. And I think that helps a lot. I think one thing I will say is that when you use the Norwegian yeast, the hop character sticks around for a long time. That's one yeast that we found really is nice for doing hoppy beers, because you can legitimately put a 6-month code date on a beer fermented with that yeast and still have a lot of hop character at the end of 6 months. So that's kind of where I fall with hazy beers and hop character. Any tips regarding dry hopping, times, amounts, and hop types? It's interesting. When I started working with dry hopping, a 1/4 pound per barrel was kind of the going rate. And over time, it jumped up quite a bit. I think now the average pounds per barrel of hops used in craft beer is approaching 1.8 pounds per barrel. And there's been a steady climb in the amount of hops brewers are using in their beers over the last several years. I remember talking to Julian Shrego at Beechwood and out in California, and he's become a good friend of mine, and we did a lot of things together when I was working at Stone. And he told me he's not dry hopping anything at less than 2 pounds per barrel, which was more than we were using in most of our beers at Stone. So it was like, that was kind of an eye-opening conversation. And there's a lot of the hazy brewers, especially out in California, that are using 5 to 6 pounds per barrel of hops, which is crazy, but in some ways, but it gets them what they want. And so I think there's no real rules. I think if you're dry hopping under 1 pound per barrel these days, people aren't going to look at your beer as being extremely hoppy. And so that's something.
More from Mitch Steele when we're back from this break. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the brew bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the brew bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a brew bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com.
Amounts and hop types. I talked about amounts, times. What we like to do in New Realm, and this is what we did at Stone as well, is we like to chill the beer down to about 60 degrees Fahrenheit from a fermentation temperature of 70 to 75, depending on the beer. And that helps get some of the yeast to settle out in the cone. And then we'll draw the yeast off of the cone, and then we'll dry hop. And we'll dry hop at 60 degrees and do 2 to 3 recircs or CO2 bubblings to try and keep the yeast suspended or keep the hops suspended. And then we'll chill the tank down. I don't like to leave hops in the beer after we dry hop for more than 5 to 7 days. I like to get them out of there because, and there has been science that shows that you get the optimal hop character pretty quickly out of those hops as long as they're suspended. I think Tom Shellhammer out at Oregon State did some work on this. It was fascinating stuff, but his research showed that 24 hours was all you needed as long as the hops were in suspension. And I know some breweries that have tried doing that. I think for our process, hops kind of peak at about 3 days. And so anytime after that, you're starting to pull things out of the hops that you may not want. As far as hop types, anything goes, but you can't go wrong with a C hop and some of these new hops. Most of the new hops that are coming out now that are being bred to use as a dry hop. They've got incredibly intense aromas and flavors that they put into the beer. So I think, the only thing you probably don't want to use as a dry hop is something that's specifically developed to be a bittering hop, a hop like Warrior or something like that. But other than that, I think anything's game, and I encourage people to just try it and see if it works. I remember we did some hop trials with German hops at Stone before we brewed the anniversary German IPA, and we were blown away by how well the hops carried through in the beer. The German hops have about 3% alpha acids. It's nowhere close to what American hops have as far as bittering power and as far as the compounds in the lupulin glands. But I tell you what, it was the flavors that we got off some of those traditional German hops were incredible. And so, I would never tell anybody not to use a hop for dry hopping, because I think even if it doesn't work, you're going to learn something. The beers that we served at Anheuser-Busch under the GABF, did the microbrew side of AB have a different name? It was Anheuser-Busch, and we called it the Anheuser-Busch Specialty Brewing Group. So if I remember correctly, we had 2 booths side by side at the GABF, and we were serving, the classic Bud Light, Michelob type beers on one side, and then we served some of the specialty beers on the other side of the table. And but it was all, that was one thing that Anheuser-Busch and I felt very strongly about at the time, was to not try and use a different name and not fly under the radar as far as who was really brewing the beer. And so that's that's how that went. Now I know things are a little different in the business, and AB, they've got all these craft brewers now, and they're releasing these beers under their name, and it doesn't really say AB anywhere on the label. But I can tell you, at the time in the mid-90s, that was not what we wanted to do. Okay, Malcolm asks, I heard from somewhere that you may have done a recent collab with Matt Cole of Fatheads. Yeah, we did. It was about almost 2 weeks ago now. And Matt and I have known each other for 10 years. And the first time I met Matt, I got to go out to Cleveland and brew a beer at his brew pub And Matt is one of my favorite people in the business, and I love hanging out with him, and I love his beers. I think he's one of the best brewers in the country. The beer that we did is an India Pale Lager. It was Matt's idea to do this. We used our standard house lager yeast in it, which is the Weinstefan lager strain, the 3470. And the late hopping on this one is it is Simcoe and Strata. And Simcoe has been one of my favorite hops for a long time, and Strata is a newer variety that a lot of people are doing some work with, and it's a pretty exciting hop. It's hard to pin down what the flavors you get from Strata are, but resiny and kind of a marijuana type character without being overly dank or oniony, garlicky is what most people seem to mention when they talk about Strata. I'm excited for the beer. I like I said earlier, we do aroma tests on all our fermenters every day, and this beer is coming along really nicely. We're just probably on Monday going to chill it down for dry hopping, and the dry hopping will be a blend of Simcoe and Strata again, and then should be out, I'm going to say mid-March if all goes well. We are going to put it in cans, and I'm excited about it. I think Matt and I have come up with something really neat. Malcolm, again, anything interesting about where you may? I'm not sure I understand the question. Where you made ingredients or techniques? I guess this is referring to the IPL. Anyway, hopefully I answered that. Sean asked, thoughts on homebrewers and continuing education with brewing. Any tips, hints on where to go that doesn't break the bank? That's a fascinating question. I know the brewing schools can get very expensive. I think most of the brewing schools in the United States are doing a really great job. UC Davis, Siebel, American Brewers Guild. We've hired people from all three of those spots over the years, at Stone and at New Realm, and I can tell you they all come in with great knowledge and great skills. For home brewers, I think the development of the internet, and now I'm going to start sounding old, because when I started home brewing, there was no internet available to people, and you had to research through books and talking to people. But the internet is a great place to really learn a lot about brewing. Continuing education, one of the things that I think is critical for any home brewer who's thinking about trying to get into pro brewing is to spend some time at a brewery and volunteer your time, or get a part-time job, or do something so you understand the rigors of brewing beer on a professional level, because it's a lot different. It's still a lot of fun, but it's just a ton of cleaning and a lot of stuff that really doesn't have anything to do with developing a beer or being innovative. 80 to 90% of the job is planning and cleaning, and then the rest of it, you get to come up with some new beers now and then. So that's something I would recommend to anybody that's a home brewer that would like to get into pro brewing or has dreams of getting into pro brewing. Just make sure you get to do that so you know what you're getting into. And for most home brewers, that's not a deterrent. Once they experience it, they get even more excited about it, which is great. But I do recommend the schools. I think that any of those three schools that I mentioned in the United States would be a great place to get a brewing education, but it is a commitment. It's a time commitment, and it's a financial commitment, and it's an investment that sometimes can be hard to cough up, and I get it. There are short courses you can take through most of these organizations that won't break the bank. They won't cost you an arm and a leg. And, if you can sign up for a 2-day course at any of these schools, you'll get a lot out of it. And then you can figure out whether you want to start thinking about investing more in your education. But yeah, it's expensive. It's funny, when I was at Anheuser-Busch, when I started doing new products, that's the first time I had a computer that had internet access, and I started doing research on beer styles back then, and I was looking at all these really old school beer sites trying to learn how to brew. beers that at Anheuser-Busch they really hadn't thought about brewing before. I tell you, one of the best resources I had at Anheuser-Busch was the brewmasters there. When I worked in St. Louis, there were on the corporate brewing staff some German brewmasters that had been in the industry their whole careers and were amazing to talk to and talk about techniques and talk about what worked and what didn't work, or how to brew a Helles, or how to brew a Bock beer, or how to brew a Hefeweizen. I mean, these guys knew it all. And they were working with Anheuser-Busch, managing the production of American lagers, but they still loved to talk about those traditional German styles. And it was just fascinating to, sit across the table with them, drinking a beer and just talking about some of that kind of stuff. And we were able to brew a lot of, we brewed a Maibach and a Bock and a German Hefeweizen, which actually got released by Anheuser-Busch. And it was just a great experience. The next question, do you typically start a brew with city tap water, or do you start with pure water such as RO? We use city tap water at New Realm, but what we do is we run it through a carbon filter to take out all the chlorine. And I will caveat that with a comment that the water we're using in both Virginia Beach and Atlanta is very soft, so it's a blank palate, and you can add salts as you need to. And I use that water calculator that's on the internet. I use that all the time to figure out salt additions for our beers. And it's, I think the fact that we have really soft water in both these breweries makes things very easy. When I was working at Stone, Southern California got their water from a mix of the Colorado River and then Sierra Nevada mountains snow melt. And depending on the situation of, the drought conditions in California that cropped up from time to time, the mix would change. And so sometimes the water would be all Colorado River water. And when that happened, it had picked up so much mineral content going through Colorado and Arizona and such that it was really hard to brew with. I mean, there were times when we were coming in with 350 parts per million calcium hardness in this water. And so at Stone, we RO'd everything to an extent. We didn't try to RO completely. We just adjusted the blend percentage and so that we got the mineral content that we wanted for our beers, which typically was about 100 parts per million hardness. But in Atlanta and in Virginia Beach, we can do whatever. Ryan, any new styles coming up that you're excited about? Yeah, I think... I don't know if these are new or not, but I'm excited about India Pale Lager. I think it's kind of a cool style, and I haven't brewed a lot of it. I think the reemergence of lagers is kind of exciting. And, we just did an Italian Pilsner on our pilot system yesterday. And, those kind of things I'm pretty excited about. I will say I'm not all that excited about doing really sweet beers, be them pastry stouts or the IPAs that have a whole bunch of fruit added to them. It's just not what I like to drink. But I mean, we've done them and we've had good success with them. But I think I'm a beer flavored beer guy by and large, and so anything that's malt and hop forward, I'm gonna enjoy. I don't know if there's anything new that's coming along. I can tell you that we're playing around with seltzers. And that's something that, most people wouldn't think of me being interested in, but, we brewed them because people in our restaurant were asking for them. And our restaurant, Georgia beer law does not allow us to serve, guest beers or wine or spirits unless we make them ourselves. And, so we've been, doing some seltzers at New Realm and playing around with the flavors and learning a lot about it. And it's just, just like learning anything, it's fascinating, and whether I drink them or not, I'm still focused on making the best ones I can and the most interesting ones we can. Telecaster or Stratocaster? Well, that's a good question. I like them both for different reasons. The Stratocaster is probably the most versatile guitar that I own. but the Telecaster is great for doing certain kinds of music, and you can get a lot crunchier with a Telecaster than a Stratocaster in my experience. So there are times when I reach for one or the other. And an SG is what I played in the Stone House Band, the Gibson SG, and I love that guitar as well. So I'm kind of a gearhead. I like what you can do with different guitars and different amps, and I'll never claim to be a good guitar player, but I enjoy the hell out of it. And being able to have a few guitars and experiment with them is a lot of fun. Okay, Nick asks, my water is so hard that I brew with RO water. I've been playing around with adding sodium chloride in addition to typical gypsum and calcium chloride. Did you find that you needed to pay attention to your sodium levels at Stone? Yeah, we did to a certain extent. I know at Liberty Station, our water treatment there was ion exchange, and that increased the sodium levels a lot. We weren't brewing beers where that really was coming through. The lighter beers are where you're going to start getting kind of a salty character. But I'm a big fan of Brew and Water, the website, and you can put in your water analysis and what kind of beer you want to brew, and they have templates built out for all sorts of beer styles and all sorts of brewing locations, and then you can play around with it and figure out what salts you want to add. And I think that's a really great resource for brewers. And I know a ton of craft brewers that are using that all the time. It's a wonderful resource, and it's free. So, even better. I'll never say anything bad about it because it's helped me tremendously. Let's see. I don't know if anybody has any other questions or if there's anything I forgot to answer. Yeah, I will say, here's one. Hey, Dave, any possibility of seeing another collaboration with Great North Ale Works? Northern Lights Black IPA was amazing. Yeah, I hope so. I will never turn down a trip to New Hampshire or New England. It's one of my favorite places in the world. And so if I get a chance to brew with Rob again, I would jump at it. Rob and I have talked about it kind of off the cuff, but we haven't really talked about it seriously yet. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he brewed another batch of the Black IPA about a year ago. But boy, that beer did come out good. And we've got our own Black IPA now at New Realm. It's going into a mixed pack, a mixed 12-pack, and it's called Parting Shot Black IPA. And, I know Black IPAs are a polarizing beer style for a lot of people, but I still love them if they're done right and they're not too roasty and you get a lot of hops out of them. I think they're wonderful to drink. But, I'd love to brew with Rob again sometime soon. And so maybe I'll reach out to him at some point and see if we can set something up. I'd love to have him down to Atlanta as well. I didn't really talk about our Virginia Beach brewery, I don't think, very much, but I did mention that we were able to buy that in mid-2018 when it went up for auction after Green Flash got foreclosed on. The brewing team there is great. We've hired back a bunch of people that used to work for the brewery when it was Green Flash, so they knew the brewery backwards and forwards, and they're very good brewers. And so it's been a pretty neat thing. Atlanta is a 25 hectoliter system. The Virginia Beach Brewery is a 50 barrel system with larger fermenters. So we're able to, beers like our Hazy Like a Fox IPA, which is our best-selling beer, we can brew up in Virginia Beach and get a lot of efficiencies because we're brewing larger batches. And so what's happened over the last year and a half that we've been operating that Virginia Beach Brewery is we've transitioned a lot of what we call our core brands, Hoplandia IPA, Euphonia Pilsner, Hazy Like a Fox IPA, Hoptropolis IPA, those kind of beers. We've transitioned those up to Virginia Beach, and we're brewing larger batches of those up there. And then in Atlanta, we are doing a lot of innovation work, and we're doing seasonals and collaborations and things that we are going to brew maybe once or twice and then move on. And we've got a 5-barrel pilot system in Atlanta. It was built by SS Brewing Technologies, and it's a great little system and makes great beer. So that's my rule is any brewer on our team can brew on that system, provided they do all the legwork in advance, figuring out what they want to brew, coming up with a recipe, building the recipe in our form, and reviewing the recipe with Tyler and me. So that's how it works. And we've got some creative people, so they've been able to brew a lot of beers on our system. A lot of the pilot beers, I'd say maybe 20% of them are ones that I came up with, and the rest of them are ones that our brewing team came up with. Thank you. I was a keynote speaker at the New Hampshire Brewers Conference in 2017. That was a very fun trip. It was nice to be back, and I was blown away by the beer scene in New Hampshire. When I was living in New Hampshire, we had Smutty Nose, we had Portsmouth, we had Martha's Exchange in Nashua. There were a couple others that I don't think exist anymore. But the beer scene was kind of bleak. And last I heard, there were like 70 or 80 brewers in New Hampshire, professional brewing, craft brewing breweries, which is a lot given the number of people that are in that state. So it's pretty cool to see. I may not want to go back to New Hampshire and start a brewery at this point, unfortunately, but that's that is what it is. It's getting pretty crowded up there. We've got time. We've got about 4 minutes, 5 minutes or so. If anybody has any other questions or anything you'd like to learn about what we're doing, I am happy to take them. Did I have a favorite stone beer while I was there? It's taken me a while to kind of figure out which beer that was, but it was the 10th anniversary Ruination beer that we did. The brewers called it Ruin 10, and it was designed as a one-off beer. And we ended up brewing it for a few years after that and changed the name to Ruin 10 from Ruination 10th anniversary. That was a beer that was 10% alcohol or so. And we took the Centennial dry hop that we used in the regular Ruination at the time, and then just doubled it by adding Citra. So it was a 50-50 blend of Centennial and Citra. And that was one of those beers when I was talking about how hop flavor falls off a cliff. That was one of the ones that the hop flavor really went off, descended very quickly once it hit about 30 days. But man, I love that beer. Really thought it was one of the best. The Enjoy By beers we did at Stone were huge. I thought that was a brilliant concept. That was Greg's idea to do this. And, to his credit, he gave me the creative freedom to brew what I thought would be the best beer for it. And, in fact, he told me, he goes, I don't care what you brew as long as it's delicious, like what we do, and it's like, okay, I can work with that. And we were able to put together a recipe that worked really well. And I remember the first one we did had a lot of Nelson Sauvin hops in it. And, when Greg approached me with this idea, he told me that we'd be brewing it 4 times a year. And so I looked at our inventories and what we had contracted, and I'm like, okay, well, we can afford to use Nelson Sauvin in this beer. And then, within 4 months or so, we went to about a once a month release, and I had to change the recipe a little bit. And so we did it kind of gradually, but I don't know if the recipe's changed since I left. I know the last 3 years that we were brewing that beer, the recipe never changed. It was always the same. And we were just starting to do unfiltered versions when I left. Other favorites at Stone. I mean, Stone Pale Ale, I thought was a classic. I hated to see that one go away. Sublimely Self-Righteous has a special place in my heart. The Black IPA, because I had to convince Greg that it was worth trying. Steve was all over it, and Greg was not. He was not sold on the idea at all. He thought it had been done before, which I didn't really understand that comment, because I only knew of one brewer who had done it. But once we went through a few pilot batches, and he was getting more skeptical, and then I finally got it and brought it up to him, and he just looked at me and says, okay, I'm sold. And that was kind of a neat thing, because I did go out on a limb to try and get that beer done, and I believed in it. And it turned into a pretty groundbreaking beer. I think it was probably the first nationally released Black IPA. And Black IPAs kind of, did this, and, they lasted for a couple of years, and then, the whole thing got confused by the the oxymoron that a black IPA presents, and also by people calling it Cascadian Dark and whatever the heck else they wanted to call it. And I think that kind of took any momentum that beer had and just stopped it dead in its tracks. And it's funny with that beer. We discontinued it as Stone a couple of years before I left, and I had people coming up to me who were very angry that we had discontinued it. And I would always say, when was the last time you bought it? Have you had one in a while? And they're like, well, no, it's been a couple of years or something. And I'm like, well, that's just it. It's if people aren't buying the beer, you have to stop. There's no point in continuing to make it as much as you love it. And I think that's something that the business has seen a lot of in the past few years, where you have to really pay attention to what people are buying. The days where you could convince people that your beer was something special and get them to drink it on a regular basis, I think have kind of gone away. And you have to really pay attention to what people are drinking and what they're asking for. Have I moved away from dry hop Citra? No, not so much. I tend to just approach it understanding that the flavor is going to tail off. And so when I do use Citra and a dry hop, I tend to use other hops as well. And I think that's how I've dealt with it, is just, do a mix of hops with the Citra. Simcoe and Citra is one that I like, and Centennial and Citra, which was Ruin 10. I love that one. So just understanding what happens to that hop over time is important to know, as you're putting your beer recipes together. We've done single hop Citras. We have a series called Hop Audition that we do single hop beers with. And we did one with Citra that was really good. But I think unless you're using it as a mid-fermentation dry hop, you probably want to blend it with something else, or just have a beer that is going to be in and out pretty quickly. Thank you for the promo on my book. It was something that I'll always be very proud of being able to do, and very grateful that I was able to do it. The research trips that we did to England to get the information we needed to write that book was incredible. Once in a lifetime experiences. And I got to talk with some really great brewers and really great people who really knew British IPA more than just about anybody in the United States. So that was pretty cool. If you haven't read my book, I'd love for you to give it a shot. Like I said, it was written and released in 2012. So there's a lot that's happened with India Pale Ale since then. Every once in a while I get people asking me to write a second edition of the book, which I don't really have time for. Unfortunately, I'd love to take a crack at it, but yeah, I don't see that happening anytime soon. But anyway, I appreciate all the questions. It's always fun to talk about beer. It's fun to talk about guitars too. So thanks for that. It's been fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And if you ever get a chance to come to Atlanta or Virginia Beach and stop by our brewery, let me know. I'd love to come out and say hi if I'm there. But in any event, keep drinking good beer and, enjoy the beer industry. It's a great business. It's a lot of great people in it, and it's just a great way to have fun. So appreciate the time. Appreciate Marshall asking me. Thank you, Marshall. And hopefully I'll see you all soon. Thanks.
Huge thanks to Mitch Steele for taking the time out of his weekend to sit down with patrons for an hour and answer their questions. And thanks as well to the patrons that make all of this possible. We are so incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to contribute to what we believe is the coolest industry in the world, brewing and beer. And we really would just love it so much. Remember, you can be a part of future sessions by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, and be sure to visit brewlosophy.com to keep up on all of the sciencey stuff we're up to. Here's to hoping you're all staying safe, happy, and healthy. Cheers. The Brulosophy Podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy Podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.